Welcome to Redefining Medicine, an intimate and personalized program that illustrates a different side of the practice of medicine. Our in-depth conversations will focus on the physicians and practitioners who are redefining medicine through their integrative, functional, and holistic approach to health and well-being.
I would like to welcome Dr. Gordon Crozier, a nationally recognized physician and pioneer in genetic medicine. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to start off learning more about before you started practicing functional medicine. You experienced your own medical difficulties. Could you share your personal story?
I was bit by a tick in second grade. This is long before anybody even knew what Lyme disease was. Nobody heard of Lyme disease back then. I'm 62 at this point. So that was years ago that I was bit by a tick. So nobody heard of it. But I became very sick at that point. And I came to a point where I could no longer read. I went from the top of my class to the bottom of my class. And it was very devastating to me because of not being able to read. It took me 4 years to be able to retrain my brain and retrain myself to be able to read again. And so I slowly got that back. But ever since that bite, my health all through my childhood was undulating. So I was in and out of health and in and out of health. So that really led to a lot of my depression throughout my teenage years, is because I really struggled mentally because of what it had done to my brain. So I also, in my teenage years, had the unfortunate development of Crohn's disease into my life. And that was actually when I was at a boarding school. I was away at a boarding school and became so sick. I was losing weight, was down to 89 pounds, and went to all these doctors. Finally, they found out that I had Crohn's disease, a very destructive disease. Back in those days, we didn't know much about Crohn's disease, and there really was not much available. So they really would just give you steroids. They would give you Valium, and that's about it. That's about what they gave you for Crohn's at that point. So I was in the hospital at one point in my life. During that stay in the hospital, I was only 17. I was diagnosed when I was 16. And at 17, they were going to remove a large portion of my colon. And at that point, I said, this is not the way I want to do this. I'm going to find another path for health and healing. And I was only 17, so my parents were away, so I called my grandmother and I said, meet me at the hospital. I checked out, just left my stuff, checked out, met my grandmother at the front of the hospital, left, and I said, I'm not going to do surgery. I refuse to do surgery on my body. And that's when I began to find a path for eating according to what my body really needed. So I kind of stopped everything, did a little 3-day fast, just water, pure water, and then began to introduce what I knew I could eat, and slowly developed my eating patterns that I could tolerate to really heal myself and my gut. So eventually, when I was getting better, and I seemed to get better, I decided I wanted to go into medicine. So I became a physician assistant first, and I worked in neurology and neurosurgery and worked in those specific fields, but they kept encouraging me, you need to go to medical school. So I just applied on a whim, and I got into 2 medical schools, not one, and the only 2 that I applied to, actually, I got into both of them. And I chose the one that was far away from my home in Florida, in Tampa area, and it was, so it was way up in Des Moines, and because of that, it really was away from everything. I thought I could study well. But there I did fairly well, but I still had some undulating health times. But then when I was working at the university is where I had my really bad time, where I began to really get so sick from, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was mold toxicity. We were living in a brand new home, the first people to live in that home. But the problem with that is that home was full of mold. We didn't know it. And so I got so sick at that time, and that's what really drove me. Suddenly I'm doing surgery, and in the middle of surgeries, I'm starting to pass out. Nobody could figure it out. Nobody. I went to everybody, every doctor there, and at Cleveland Clinic. I also was sent up there to some of their specialists. Nobody could figure out what was going on with me. It took me years to really get well, and I had undulating health in my colon until I really realized at the point when I was at the university that I had mold toxicity. And then I began reading the literature and the articles in PubMed on mold as related to Crohn's. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this was probably my problem my whole life. And I didn't realize that it was related to my genetics, where I can't remove those toxins from my body. So everything was all related, but I didn't understand that right away. And it took me until I was getting into some of the fellowships here, where I began to really understand the interplay between all of those things and how they all related as one. And so that was the eye-opener for me. So because of that, I found my own path to healing. But because of that, that's when I decided to just suddenly, about 7 years ago, break out, totally leave traditional medicine, and went out on my own and became all cash-based, and broke a path for myself. And it was do or die at that point, because I had 6 kids I had to provide for. And so I just decided, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to help people find their path to healing.
So how did that change your practice?
Well, it changed it because I realized that traditional medicine did not really have all of what they really needed, or they didn't have privy to all the tests and didactic tests that they could actually use. They're out there for everybody to use, but they weren't really taught those from their traditional medical training. Because of that, it kind of changed my whole perspective on traditional medicine versus integrative medicine, and using functional medicine and using our bodies to heal themselves, and really delving into cellular medicine. And so that's what I decided to do, is dive into cellular medicine, understand how our cells work. What is making my cells tick? So how do my genetics affect my cellular matrix? You know, what in my genetics is telling my mitochondria to talk to my DNA, and my DNA to talk to my mitochondria. So the mitochondria is like the brain of our cell. And that's where a lot of the things hide in our body. And if we can bring health to the mitochondria, we can overcome a lot, or prevent, or help people live better with their disease process. And that's my goal, is for people to be healthy.
So you do use genetic testing for each of your patients. Could you talk
Yes,
about
I
that?
do. I use, we start with the basics, so it's not expensive, and then we delve into deeper genetics as we go along if we need more. So everybody will get some form of genetic testing. There's certain genes that really are kind of the detox genes, the SODs, and some of those genes that really dictate how we're going to be able to detox our body. And also there's a blood test called the HLA-DRBQ. If we have a problem with that specific genetic SNP, which that's on chromosome number 6, if we have a problem with that, then we can have a real bad problem in detoxing our body from certain pesticides, herbicides, biotoxin diseases, all the things. So if you get a virus, what's left behind from that virus or bacteria after you kill it off, those toxins get trapped in our body, and some of us just have a hard time getting rid of those toxins. If you're one of those people, which that's about 25% of the American population, has that genetic SNP where they can't get rid of those toxins, that's a big deal. And so I start there with that basis, and then of course the MTHFRs, which a lot of doctors are doing today. So I do as much as I need to for them.
Your practice, you use ongoing advancements in genetic testing. What are you most excited about or optimistic about with the genetic testing?
Well, I think with genetic testing, I think that we're finding out modalities on how to turn on and off certain genetic SNPs. And I think we're realizing more of that all the time, on how to get the genes to react correctly the way they should, the way they did when we were a child. So when we were a child, we weren't sick probably, but as we age, these genetic SNPs begin to express. If they express, that's usually because of toxin modality, heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, molds, Lyme, you name it. It's all of those different things. So what we want to do is then turn those genes off, and I think we're learning more all the time. And, I always get these downloads every day about genetic testing from all the different things, UC Davis and different universities that are doing a lot with Rutgers, that are doing a lot with genes and genetic testing. So what's happening is we're realizing how we can kind of alter that genetic expression. And so some of it's through our diet, some of it's through removing toxins so that it will express correctly. And then some of them are through other treatment modalities. We can use peptides, which are kind of newer to the market now, but we can use peptides or exosomes, these different modalities that actually help us alter the way our genes are expressing. So I love it because I think we have great promise for the future.
Your book, Healing One Cell at a Time, details your experience being chronically ill, finding wellness, and treating patients through an integrative and personalized framework. Why do you believe it is important for physicians to share their stories?
I think that when you share your story, it becomes real for the patient so that they can understand that you also had struggles. If you always put yourself up on a pedestal and you always act like you're invincible and that you're not sick and that you're not the real person. So I told my story. I told my story in my book about my own problem with depression and how that led to a suicide attempts. And that was because of what happened to me neurologically because of mold toxicity. And so because of that, I want other people to realize they might be there, but there's hope for you in the future. Look at me today. I can exercise, I can walk, I can do everything I need to do, I can provide for my family, I have hope, I'm happy. And so I want people to have that hope in seeing where I was and where I am today. And I believe that for other people. And I'm excited because I have shared that. I now have 3 that are in medical school that I've treated in the past that were kind of similar to my story, and they were just down and out. But now they are able to be attending medical school and hopefully to enter this form of medicine so that they can truly help people from the cellular level.
Thank you, Dr. Crozier, for joining us today.
Thank you.